Okay, good morning, everybody. Don't know if this is working or not, but I'll shout anyway. I'll project. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Lancashire Climate Summit. It's really good to see people in the flesh. You're all bigger than that big. My name's Keith Ashcroft. I'm the Environment Agency's Area Director for Cumbria and Lancashire. My role this morning is to try and navigate us through some important, incredibly timely thought and hopefully action-provoking discussions and presentations. It's going to be really pacey because actually in terms of climate change we need to work faster than the climate is changing. It's an interesting morning for me coming back to County Hall. I started my career here. I'm not going to talk you through it in real time. I started my career here sometime in the 1980s. Louise Ellman was the leader then, if you want to date it on the plaques outside. A time when global concerns around the environment were the hole in the ozone layer. Anyone remember that? Or acid rain? Those were the topics of the day. Global warming was something that kind of, well, is that a thing or not? Interesting reflection, ozone layer, acid rain, resolved through commitment, through regulation, through behaviour and market change. And we are now at an absolutely pivotal point, and we'll hear some powerful conversations this morning. There is no doubt now, and given many of our experiences over the last 5 or 6 years, that climate change is a real thing, and it is happening here in Lancashire. Many of you will have experienced or know people who were flooded, who were affected by the smoke from the moorland fires, or who were affected or anxious about river supply or the pressure on the environment. So it's all the more important that we gather now, and I think thank you to the whole team, to Dave Welsby, to Sean Turner and others for bringing this event together today, because I think this is a really important start. Actually, we are no way finished. We are starting on this. Really delighted that Councillor Philippa Williamson, leader of the County Council, is able to just spend a few minutes introducing today's event. So I'll hand over to you, Philippa.
I didn't realise it was so far. Right. Hi, everyone. Really great to see everyone. And I just want to say a big welcome to Preston and to County Hall. For some of you who haven't been here before, it looks a bit different, and it's part of a big programme of work that we're doing to really kind of bring us respect the tradition, but bring us into the 21st century, and it's a professional outfit that we want to be. So it's really, really good for you to be here. Good to see so many organisations making the time to be with us. As you said, it is the first climate summit that we have. Hopefully, won't be the last. I'm also really pleased to welcome Emma Howard-Boyd. You'll see later, Chair of the Environment Agency, and I'm sure everyone here is looking forward to hearing her perspective on the climate challenge. So it is our first climate conference, but just a little bit of history really. Lancashire does have a strong history of pioneering work on the environment. Over 50 years ago, we led nationally the way in reclaiming derelict land. I didn't actually know this until a few weeks ago. It's quite fascinating, and what's interesting is I've probably driven past Chisnall Hall endlessly on the M6 and never realised that it was one of these first sites, and now there it is, flourishing woodland, flourishing wildlife, and a real model for what we would like to be able to do, and a sure sign of our commitment. But back in 1991, we published a green audit, which was the first survey of its kind in the UK, and that gave a really comprehensive picture of environmental conditions across the county at that time. And here we are, 2021, we started this, and we repeated that pioneering study, building on the approach, and it's really allowed us to look at what's improved and what we need to do better. Sean will be introducing all of that later on in his presentation. He'll also be looking at some important work that we've done on carbon pathways, and give us several options for reaching our net zero ambitions. And crucially, all of that evidence that we've been pulling together, we see as giving us a really, really strong evidence base for building some credible plans, which we want to be able to use. We're currently developing a long-term plan for Lancashire with leaders across the county, looking to 2050 about what we want to achieve, and stage posts along the way. So the work here today and what's been going on in the backgrounds can feed directly into all of that. Individually, all of you here and as part of your organisations, we've all been making great strides in developing plans and taking action on the ground. But when we set this up, what we wanted to do is actually, the impact that we can make working together in different ways is actually going to be much, much more powerful. So today really is about opening up that debate on how we can accelerate action, and importantly, where we can have the greatest impact by working together. And that's more important than ever when we look at what's happening across the rest of Europe in the last 2 weeks, and the concerns around energy security. It's never more relevant for us to be doing all of this. So this conversation is really, really important. As Keith said, we've got a packed agenda. It is a packed agenda. We'll be looking at reducing carbon emissions from housing, transport and businesses, as well as the role nature plays in carbon reduction and the importance of adapting to the effects of climate change. So a lot to get through in a short space of time. And, I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm hoping that we get some really positive action plans out of it, and a commitment that this won't be the first time that we all to get together as a group, but also individually working on different projects. So welcome once again to everyone. Really, really good to see you all. And I'm going to hand back to Keith, who's going to tell us all the sort of health and safety things, which you've got them all listed down, I hope, because I can't remember them all. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Philippa. No, thank you, Philippa. As you say, we're in a decisive decade, and if there's one number to take away from today, it's 93. So everyone writes down 93, and this time next month writes down 92. That is how many months we have left in the 2020s. So it's very easy to think this is a long-term thing. This is a decisive decade, and we need to count it in weeks, days, and months. So a long list of health and safety issues. Not really. If you could ask people to just switch their phones onto silent. If there is an emergency, actually Debbie's now going to do which door it is. If there are no alarms planned, so we go out the door, and I think the staff will guide us down the stairs. I know we've got lots of bags around. Please, if you can kind of tuck them away to all the form filling. If anyone trips over and bangs their head, especially given the importance of people in the room, will be a nightmare. And I think that was about health and safety. So I'm delighted to welcome Emma Howard-Boyd back to Lancashire, a regular visitor, to provide our keynote. We arranged today, actually, surrounding Emma was up with the Board of Trade yesterday in Barrow, and it's kind of on the way back, the real West Coast line back down. Emma's been the chair of the Environment Agency since 2016, and a board member for several years before that. Emma is a genuine global player in the world of climate change. So Emma has been the UK Commissioner on Global Adaptation. Emma has the largest book of connections and networks. So working with Bill Gates, Ban Ki-moon and others. Is now a UN ambassador on the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience, and a member of the government's Board of Trade. But Emma also has strong personal connections back into Lancashire. As I say, is a regular visitor, and has an amazing ability to connect the global right through to the local. I do recall us being in a church talking to Edna and her friends who'd been flooded, and Emma literally putting her arm around. So that connection from the global and truly seeing the impact locally is incredibly powerful. So Emma, please.
It is a long way across. Thank goodness I didn't fall. What Keith didn't say was one of my first acts that I did with Keith as becoming acting chair was this long walk along the banks at Croston with the then Prime Minister. I had slightly outsized boots on and they had far bigger strides from me, and we had the cameras watching me. So that is one of my things that I'm most nervous about, walking in front of the public. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak at today's Lancashire Climate Summit. I would like to start by saying that humanity has so much to gain through partnership and solidarity, not least a greener, more prosperous and just future. Obviously, progress is stalled by war, and this makes what is happening in Ukraine heartbreaking twice over. As Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and Chair of the Elders, wrote last week, it is all the more grotesque that the world has been plunged into this fresh crisis by the choices made by one individual, President Putin, when we are already grappling with another existential threat, the climate crisis. So we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine who are resisting the assault on their homeland, and with the brave Russian citizens who are publicly voicing their own opposition to the war. And I think we all look forward to the end of these troubled and unsettling times. So thank you for hosting this event today. The last time I was in Preston, I was actually in Glasgow. I was at the Microsoft stand at COP26, where I was having a go on a Minecraft version of Preston's flood scheme. The aim of Minecraft Preston, being displayed to world leaders at COP26, is to help young people embrace STEM subjects and learn about flood risk and climate change. The £55 million Preston and South Ribble Flood Risk Management Scheme itself is a project whose primary purpose is climate adaptation, but one that also helps the county create green space and reach net zero. It will protect over 4,500 homes and businesses. It will also create significant areas of new habitat and help to reduce emissions through carbon sequestration. The Environment Agency is pleased to be working in partnership with local authorities, the County Council, the community and businesses to achieve this. It's a great example of the type of collaboration we need in the face of climate change. Last week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report that was approved by 195 governments around the world. It said the world faces unavoidable multiple climate hazards over the next 2 decades, with global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Even temporarily exceeding this warming level will result in additional severe impacts, some of which will be irreversible. Just before COP26, the Environment Agency published our 3rd adaptation report under the Climate Change Act. It shows that last year, more than 76,000 incidents were reported to the Environment Agency's Incident Management Service, including flood, drought, fires, fish kills and pollution incidents. That's 1 every 7 minutes, 24 hours a day. The climate crisis may be international, but its impacts are in your village, your shop and your home. But the disruption to the transport links and supply chains, infrastructure and nature shows that everyone in the public and private sectors needs to prioritise adaptation and resilience. At COP26, $130 trillion, is the mic not working? At COP26, $130 trillion of private capital was committed to hitting net zero emissions targets by 2050. That's good news, but those commitments are not yet aligned with local knowledge, experience and expertise. How many construction projects will be invested in before 2050 that are not currently subject to the rigour demanded of net zero goals? If construction does not take into account mounting floods and extreme heat, the low carbon infrastructure we need could itself become the stranded assets of the future. No one wants to live in an energy efficient home that could be washed away in a flood. And we also don't want to build flood schemes that contribute to the climate crisis. As a major infrastructure deliverer, investing £5.2 billion in flood protection as part of the new National Flood Programme, the Environment Agency is seeking to influence the use of low and ultra-low carbon concrete in our flood programmes, as well as fundamentally shifting our day-to-day operations and fleet management. Our e-emission 2030 programme will deliver net zero by 2030, and it has 4 key elements: responding to the climate emergency, optimising our use of resources, benefiting people and communities to deliver a fair transition to a low carbon economy, and delivering environmental net gain. We chose 2030 rather than 2050 because we don't have time to lose, and Keith very eloquently reminded us of the 93 months. We want teams and our partners embedding emissions reductions to do their work now. This requires innovation and dedication, and will show larger organisations in the economy how to reach net zero faster. And I hope today's summit will help deliver Lancashire's climate commitments in the short term. The Environment Agency, led by Keith Ashcroft here locally, is here to help. One of my first visits as chair of the Environment Agency, as I've said, was to Croston in the aftermath of the flooding in winter 2015-16. People all over the world were watching military helicopters bringing extra flood defences to Croston, where 344 homes and businesses have been affected. For residents, at first there is a shock. Then the impact doesn't subside in a week or even a month. When the ground is saturated, as it often is in winter, every new rain cloud brings a renewed threat and the anxiety and fear that it could happen again. So it was particularly sweet for me to return to Croston in July 2017 when I helped to open the £7 million Croston Flood Risk Management Scheme. The scheme helps to manage flood risk for 438 properties, and that means hundreds of people going about their business feeling a greater sense of security every day. But flood risk isn't just about rivers. Climate change is bringing sea level rise and increased storminess. 2 weeks ago, the Environment Agency's flood schemes protected over 40,000 homes from flooding in recent storms, including on the Lancashire coast. I was delighted to open the Hesketh Outmarsh project in 2017, protecting homes and creating 360 hectares of salt marsh, an important habitat, as well as carbon absorbing environment on the internationally important Ribble estuary. Then in 2018, the Ankersholm Coastal Protection Scheme. I was also pleased to see Christmas trees being used to stabilise dunes at St Anne's, where I spent childhood holidays with my grandparents. This shows we can use nature as well as concrete to protect our coast. In total, the Environment Agency has brought more than £150 million of investment into Lancashire, better protecting more than 30,000 homes and businesses since 2015, and we plan to bring a further £325 million by 2027 to better protect a further 34,000 properties. We've also helped the drive to investment in Lancashire through a pilot scheme to encourage sustainable private sector investment in our natural environment in partnership with DEFRA, the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and Triodos Bank. One of the projects piloted was the Wyre Natural Flood Management Project. This has gone on to receive £1.5 million in private investment to help implement natural flood management measures to help in-risk communities in Lancashire. The money raised in the form of a 9-year loan will be used to deliver tree planting, creation of temporary water storage areas, leaky dams, and a network of hedges that will significantly reduce flooding. It will be repaid through the sale of ecosystem services to organisations that benefit from flood risk reduction, carbon sequestration, increasing biodiversity, and improving water quality. Local farmers and landowners will then be paid to host and maintain those natural assets. Lancashire is also benefiting from the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, where DEFRA and the Environment Agency are providing grants of up to £100,000 to environmental groups, local authorities, businesses and other organisations to help them develop nature projects in England. These provide both environmental benefits and will attract private investment too. Climate change is not only about too much water. The North West, a region dependent on reservoirs, has been under pressure in recent years as domestic water consumption has risen during lockdown. In 2018, moorland fires on Winter Hill burned for 40 days and the fires could be smelled on the Isle of Man and created widespread health concerns. Peat that had taken thousands of years to develop was lost in days. And peatland has many benefits. It reduces downstream flood risk, filters waters, meaning water companies can use less chemical treatment, leads to an increase in biodiversity to promote our native species, and helps store carbon to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And this is why, as an agency, we work with many partners, nationally and locally, to protect and re-wet peat. Working with local authorities, businesses and community groups, we have created 531 hectares of blanket bog and restored a further 2,148 hectares across England in 2019-2020. Lancashire needs to treasure and invest in this vital asset, and I look forward to hearing Tom and Jack, key nature leaders in the county, later on. Another way we work with businesses in Lancashire is through regulation. We've been helping Lancashire's largest emitters, including Castle Cement, to develop carbon reduction plans and consider how they can adopt lower carbon intensive practices. We're actively supporting the development of environmentally safe new nuclear reactors to provide part of the country's low carbon energy mix. And we're regulating Heysham and Springfields to ensure the environment continues to be protected. These changes will reduce carbon emissions, be more efficient for Lancashire's economy in the long term, and keep businesses ahead of the competition in the modern economy, where environmental innovation is highly valued. The climate crisis can seem overwhelming at times, not least with everything else that humanity must overcome. Russia's aggression in Ukraine has been truly horrendous, but I was also heartened by the words of Svitlana Krakowska, Ukraine's delegate to the IPCC, who said, "We will not surrender in Ukraine, and we hope the world will not surrender in building a climate resilient future." That climate resilient future is an opportunity to create systems and infrastructure that help people and nature thrive and prosper. Despite unique challenges, managing climate change here in Lancashire will be no simpler than anywhere else, but that's an opportunity for Lancashire to lead. And we at the Environment Agency are here to fully support your action. Thank you very much. Thank you, Keith.
Just powerful words indeed, and we'll find a way of summing those up as well, because there's a huge amount in there. It just, the complexity between social, environmental, economic and political is absolutely interlinked. Delighted now to introduce Sean. I've lost Sean, he's over there. Councillor Sean Turner. Sean has picked up the Cabinet lead role around environment and climate change, and has provided, in a reasonably short time, some real sort of incisive and energetic leadership, part of which has led us to today, to this really important point. So, Sean, over to you.
Oh, okay. So yeah, just to say the microphone is turned up as much as it possibly can be, because if we go any louder there'll be feedback. So I'll do my best to project my voice. So we go from the internationally esteemed Emma, and now you got me. And as Keith said, I took up this portfolio. In fact, I need to put my presentation on. Debbie, can you just, there's a window that keeps coming back up.
There you go.
There we go.
Should be able to move.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so there's the portfolio, and when I took this on, in fact, I'm going to say actually first, I should mention we have a hashtag for today's event. It's hashtag Lancashire Climate Summit. Our comms team have asked me to pump that out, so I've done that for you. So any social media sort of posts you want to do, if you can put hashtag Lancashire Climate Summit, I'd be much appreciated. I think we're linked into the EA's comms as well. So yeah, as I say, that's my portfolio now as from May. Prior to that, I was in public health, and our director of public health's here. There he is in the back, and there's a lot of crossover actually. And as I go through my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about that. So that's me there, and that's what this is going back to December 2010. As a council, we agreed to transition Lancashire away from carbon and address the biodiversity crisis. And what that did, sorry, this is what we've done first. With the progress we've done, it's not that we haven't done anything until today, but the Environment and Climate Programme there, £1 million has gone into that. Electric vehicles and infrastructure charging, low carbon projects, there's 5.7 million in that. We've planted just short of 150,000 trees. We've converted all of our street lamps, which is 152,000 to LED, saving a heck of a lot of money, but also a heck of a lot of carbon. We've restored 755 hectares of peatland with much more to come. So first steps, we commissioned studies. So following that 2010 notice of motion, we commissioned 4 green environmental deep dive studies to identify the scale of the challenge and the most effective way of getting there. And if you look down in the bottom corner, you can see there that you've got pre-Paris, that was the way greenhouse gases were going. Current policies, that's where it's going to take us, hopefully. And as yet, it's important to know that we've not yet actually seen a drop in our CO2 and CO2 equivalent emissions. That's still rising internationally, but that would be with our current policies. So all the things around that we've done already, maybe improvements to engines and things, and switch over to renewables, still takes us well short of the 1.5 degrees that we've got to keep under. If you look at that trajectory, which is much steeper, and that to me is a really good visual on what we need to do. As you can see, what's been pledged. So through the likes of Paris and COP26 and all these other events, that's the yellow band they're taking us, but that's above that 1.5 degrees, which is, we've already heard, so important. So the 4 studies that we commissioned, pathways to net zero. So what might they be? How we might get there? Climate resilience, which is, again, we've talked a bit about the flooding and the extreme weather, droughts and such. And how can we learn to live better with that? The State of the Environment Report, which was mentioned, I think, briefly before, back in 1990, this pioneering council, nothing to do with me, did a State of Lancashire report, and it's been a nice comparator for us to look against in the current day. And then also renewables deployment. So where are we with that? How are we doing? And what are the opportunities there? So there you can see the top line figure there of the amount of CO2 emitted in Lancashire. Just get rid of this. Yeah, and emissions are fairly evenly spread amongst transport, domestic buildings, industry and commercial sectors. I don't think that was a big surprise, but we've now got that evidence base. And the study explores 3 pathways. So 100% reduction net zero by 2030, which was originally proposed in that motion. So that kick-started this whole the studies being commissioned. So we put our finger in the air and said we want to get there by 2030. These studies have enabled us to look at what that would mean and costs as well, and all that's going to be involved. 68% reduction, that was one of the others we looked at for 2030 compared with 1990, and then a 78% reduction by 2035. So these were considered by with the evidence we got from the studies. So this shows the scale of the challenge against predicted business as usual. So there's the business as usual, which we've seen a similar graph, and there's the 2030, how steep that is, and the other two are the ones I've just spoken about. The by 2035, 78%, and that you can see that there's some both more or less hitting the mid 2040s. So that's those projections. So it's a real challenge. It's certainly not going to be easy, and we need to be doing more. I think that's the message that I'd like to get out, and I think it's something that we're all doing as an organisation. I know what we're doing, and I'm aware of all the other organisations here today that are doing their own little bits, and I just feel it would all be more powerful if we combine all that together, and that's really the purpose of the summit. So yeah, very strong action taken across all sectors could achieve that 78% reduction by 2035, which it's never going to be perfect, but that's still going to require a hell of a lot of work. And all councils can contribute, as well as all the stakeholders and partners. So the report has done it on a district level as well. It's broken it down. So we're just using Hyndburn as an example there, and you can see the pathways taken, where it would sort of leave on each sector. So it is transport, the light blue colour there. That's going to be the outstanding one. They're still going to have the most be emitting the most by the time we get to 2035 if we were to follow that pathway. As I say, they are set out for every district council. Hydrogen is only expected to play a prominent role in energy decarbonisation after 2035. It's important to note. Electrification is assumed to be the main route to replace fossil fuels until then. Net zero could be achieved for both scenarios with continued rate of intervention in carbon removals of residual emissions. So we're looking at the two scenarios there in the middle, the continued rollout of high electrification measures and a prominent role for hydrogen after that, when perhaps by then technology has moved us in a position where we can look at particularly some of the larger vehicles that we could equip with hydrogen. Not to say that isn't already happening. So net zero could be achieved. This is what the basis of the studies. It could be achieved by the early 2040s with remaining emissions balanced by maximum intervention of removal measures such as peatland restoration and tree planting. And in particular, peatland restoration, and Andy, our head of planning and environment, is in the room. In fact, something he told me which was really quite astounding was that in the UK, peatland restoration it has the chance of sequestering more carbon than all of the woodland and forests in the UK, Germany, and France put together. So quite an option actually, and we've got a lot of peatland in Lancashire, so something we can really sort of take advantage of. So achieving net zero, large scale interventions in transport, walking, cycling. That's again a public health crossover, and exactly as I say, we've talked a lot about this, but that's one part of the solution. Public transport. Lancashire is a very diverse and disparate sort of county. Compare that to GM and Merseyside. You know, it's a lot more straightforward to provide public transport there. So we've got to think outside the box in how we might bring some of that forward. And demand reduction as well, and vehicle battery charging. That's all got to be considered if we're going to move over to electrification. And we've obviously got partners in the room who can talk about some of that as well. large scale programs of domestic building intervention. So retrofitting, all this sort of stuff, you know, we really have to get to a position where when we build new houses, this stuff's already in place. Retrofitting is much more difficult, but it is what it is, and we've got to deal with that. And it's going to take a lot of commitment from us all, especially as has been mentioned with what's going on internationally. But I think we can also see this as an opportunity with the price of hydrocarbons as they are. In that we do some of this stuff now, and you know, we shouldn't be blown off course by what's going on. We have to keep this on the horizon. It's really important. Large scale carbon removal intervention. So as we've talked about, tree planting and peatland restoration. So we do know we can achieve this. Climate resilience. So basically, all you need to read on that is roughly the bottom third of that chart there on the left, which shows all the extreme weather events that have been happening since around 2000, late 90s, and how much more compacted they are now than where they were before. So that's all the historical events in Lancashire, but you can see now it's getting more constant, and we had 3 storms in a week, as we all know, which I think is a record. Yeah, it is a record. I've just had that confirmed. But we're breaking records all the time, and it's not just in this country, as we know, it's across the world. So yeah, temperatures are already 1.5 degrees higher than they were at the end of the 19th century. Keeping 1.5 alive, as the buzzword came out from the buzz phrase came out from COP26, is really, really important. Currently, we're not on that trajectory, it has to be said, and you know, we can't keep looking for excuses not to do stuff. It's going to be difficult. That's the other thing that should come out today. It's going to be very difficult, and we're going to have to show some real commitment as a combined Lancashire team, knowing that the rest of the world also have to come on board with this, because one of the common things you'll hear with Joe Public particularly is, well, why should we do anything when the rest of the world needs to do a lot more, and they're the biggest emitters, or you'd like to have India and China and etc. They would argue that we've had our time in the sun, so they should get theirs. So there's all that going on as well. But these events are going to be the thing that really start to focus people's minds. And I would say 2 rights don't make a wrong, 2 wrongs don't make a right, even. And we have to lead the way. We have to crack on. So really important stuff. There you go. So that's the projected to be significantly warmer by the 2080s. Average temperatures increasing by 4 degrees C. That's if we do nothing now, and we know the devastation that's going to cause. And as Emma said earlier, just going over 1.5 in itself is going to create things that happen that are irreversible. Yeah, rainfall intensity. Some of the pictures from flooding. Councillors are regularly bombarded with emails following heavy rain events. That happens all the time. 20% more rain now even than since 1990, which for me doesn't seem that long ago. I have just turned 50, but I remember 1990 very well. I was a young man then, and I had hair as well. But 20% more rain than then. I mean, you know, that's a heck of a lot of rain. We have to deal with it. We have to learn to live with this sort of thing now. So some of the projects that you've spoken about this morning, how can we capitalise on the projects together, and also incorporate some public health things while we're doing it? So, you know, if we're building some sort of defences, can we incorporate that for people to cycle and walk on? These are all conversations we need to have more of. And as was mentioned, the State of the Environment report, we can compare that back to the one done in 1990, and basically it's given us that exactly where we are compared to then. And there have been some improvements, but it's also quite scary in that there's a lot that needs to change, and we need to do a lot of nature recovery, biodiversity. But you see all the list of things there, the common things. And again, the health crossover, I must mention that. All these things aren't generally good for health. They could be, and we need to embrace some of this stuff. Yeah, air quality. greenhouse gases, we know CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases are at the highest level now than they have been in the last 2 million years. So that should really make us all sit up and think, well, actually something is wrong. It's having an impact on all sorts of things, weather patterns, etc. But I'll talk about the air quality management areas in Lancashire, designated because of poor air quality caused by vehicle emissions. Hopefully with a swap away from the combustion engine. I mean, nationally it's 2030, as we know. Hopefully well before then, we may see the trend move across quicker. But we have to see, we've got the cost of living crisis, we've got wars going on, things that we really don't need, but will have an important impact on air quality. Yeah, this is really important as well. Recycling has plateaued, as you can see there. The 46% of household waste is recycled. Actually, reuse is always better than recycling, so we've got to also remember that, because recycling pretty much always involves use of energy in itself. So reuse is got to be something that's, well, it is at the top of the pile, to be honest. We're a throwaway society, and having been to our waste disposal plants in Thornton and Leyland, it's a shocking scene. It's almost like a horror movie when you see the constant trail of vehicles coming in and just tipping all our rubbish into basically into a unit, a big unit that's just grappled, and you think, what happens to all that? And it's like 24/7 thing. It's yeah, we put it in the bin there and then we forget about it, but it has a big impact on the environment. Yeah, so with regards to nature, the decline in habitat that I just mentioned there and species in the county is significant, and we've got some talkers or speakers that we can talk about that more this afternoon and give us some of the fine detail. But I think it's common knowledge that I actually made a remark last night. I was we were speaking, some of us last night, and I made a remark that, and this is anecdotal, but I remember there being far more wildlife when I was a young man than there is now, and it is a bit of a shame we have damaged the planet. And renewables deployment. So as you can see there, what we predicted back in 2011 about where we might be now, we're actually quite a bit behind that. So we predicted 807 megawatts of renewables equivalent to, but actually we've deployed 544 megawatts. So we've got much to do on that. And again, it's got to be more than talk. We've got to move to action, even in this really bad time that I've already mentioned. We've really got to do a lot more, because this is a big threat to all of us. Yeah, so the wind, biomass and heat pumps are well below forecast. These are the themes emerging from the studies. So the studies are the evidence-based. So this is moving from a finger in the air, let's do it by 2030, to what can we possibly do together as a Lancashire team. And, you know, if we want to influence people to do stuff, we've all got to do our bit as well. And we've got to be seen to be doing that. That's really important. Otherwise, we will be accused of pontificating down to people. So it's really important that we get on with some of this stuff. Major green infrastructure programme. A major green housing programme, including the retrofitting, local energy planning, renewables, bus improvement, active travel and EV charging. So these are the big things that we need to be focusing on a lot more. And that's me, and I think you'll be glad about that. And thanks for listening. But like I say, the hashtag is the Lancashire Climate Summit. And thanks everybody for coming. It seems like a long time waiting for this to actually happen, but it's happening today, and it's really important. I'm glad you all came. Thank you.
No, thanks, Sean, for your energy and leadership, and that's brought us to today. Just reflecting on pathways, and actually, if you need a pathway, you kind of need to know where you're starting from. And Lancashire has an advantage in that we know where we're starting from. Other places don't have that. So I think that foundation and also those emerging themes are really important, and thankfully link into the agenda, which is a bonus. Discussions around energy have probably never been more prominent, even before the last 2 weeks. And I'm really pleased to say we've been working in partnership with both Electricity North West and Cadent, the gas network provider, The chief executive, Steve Fraser, lives about 1.5 miles from here, so we know where he lives. So I'm really pleased today we've got Steve Cox and Helen Boyle, who are just going to introduce us and tell you a little more about what's happening in the decarbonisation agenda around energy. So Steve first.
Morning, everybody. My name's Steve Cox from Electricity North West, and my role is Director of Distribution System Operations. So this is a joint presentation between Electricity North West and Cadent, who are the two infrastructure providers who operate, install and pay for all of the energy infrastructure in the region. So between us, we will invest nearly £1 billion a year over the next 5 years in the region's infrastructure. So that investment needs to be targeted towards the key themes of this presentation. And those themes are clarity, so everybody knows what we need to do. Action, creating action. So I think Sean's presentation and both Emma's presentations before aptly illustrated the need for action. I'll perhaps give you some insights into the scale of the change required across GB and across the region, but also underpinning that, the need for partnership and the opportunities, both economic and societal, that will create in the region. So we'll get this to work. Yep. There we go. So around 2 years ago, Electricity North West and Cadent commissioned a piece of work called Energy Pathways for the region, and that had some very, very simple messages in it. The first of the facts I'd like you to take away is there are really two things time-wise that we need to consider with climate action. What we do now and the need to do something now, and what we will do in the future. And there is uncertainty in the future. So, for example, the role of nuclear, the role of hydrogen as a fuel source are not yet certain in either government strategy, the national strategy, or even international technology areas. But many things are certain. So, for example, electric vehicles are perfectly viable. I've driven here in one today. You can buy an electric vehicle, and as businesses and individuals, we can adopt them. LED lighting that Sean referred to before, that Lancashire is commendably led on in terms of retrofitting the street lighting population, can be rolled out by all of us domestically and by all businesses, and makes huge financial sense. So we wanted within the pathways to engage with key regional stakeholders on two key themes. Provide certainty on what people can adopt now and actually start to make that climate change, but continue to work together as we clarify the future in some of these areas where there is uncertainty. So why is that clarity on the short term important? Energy within the country and within Lancashire, if you look at who consumes that energy and whether it's gas or electricity, 2/3 of all energy is consumed by business. 2/3. So whilst residential decisions are utterly critical to decarbonisation, what business does is even more critical to producing climate action. Businesses provide everything that we use. They provide this lectern, they provided this room, they provided the clothes we wear. Private equity is a huge potential ally in decarbonisation change. And it is critical that private equity is engaged positively to assist us in this change. So what does business need in order to act? It needs everybody in this room to be aligned around what are the key things that we should do. What creates inaction in business is when we as a group of stakeholders become overly focused on medium to long term questions. So hydrogen, I would say, is fairly short term, but it's relatively medium term. What is the future of hydrogen? Because if they are operating large fleets of vehicles or they're using heat within their plants, they will not act if they think they will back the wrong technology. So they need to know what they can do now. The pathways work effectively pleaded to the region through all the stakeholders to provide that clarity to both individuals and business. I want to talk about the scale of the change. So we've seen various charts. Sean showed some charts, and if you go to any of these types of presentations, you'll see similar charts. There are 23 million residential properties in the UK, 23 million homes, and around 3 million businesses. So if I just talk about the homes, let's pick 2050 as the date. So nobody likes 2050 as a decarbonisation date, but let's pick 2050. All of the heating systems in those homes need to change between now and 2050. So they either need a hydrogen-ready boiler or they need to convert to an electric heat pump. Okay. If you look at the scale of that change for 2050, that means we need to fit 1.5 heat pumps every minute, 24 hours a day for the next 28 years. If you believe the climate change target date is 2038, we need to fit 2.7 heaters or hydrogen boilers every minute, 24 hours a day for the next 16 years. That is a frightening number, but it's also a massive commercial opportunity for both jobs in the region, prosperity, and business in the region. So business will engage in that challenge when it sees clarity. This chart tries to illustrate the scale of, this is the next 5 years for Electricity North West. Every single working day, to get anywhere near the targets, we will need to buy, install, and fit infrastructure to recharge 500 electric vehicles a day. Something like 75 homes will connect within this region, and 40 businesses a day will need to go 100% net zero in order to hit a 2050 target. So the scale of change required is huge. Sean talked about renewable generation in the region. We will need to install something like 1.5 megawatts every single day in the next 5 years alone as we decarbonise the energy system. Happily, you don't have to pay for it. Electricity North West and Cadent will fund a lot of the infrastructure work required for this. So where are we? I go to lots of conferences as Helen does, and we talk about targets. Targets are vitally important for any climate change scientists in the room. They are vitally important to understand targets because they tell us the scale and the pace of change that we need to deliver. But the most important thing are the dots on this chart. That is where we are in the region. That is where Lancashire is in terms of actual conversion for heat pumps versus and electric vehicle uptake. So local authorities, regional stakeholders have a vital role in bringing about change, but we need to provide the people who listen to us with clarity. I think on private residential heat, something like 90% of homes in the Northwest are owned by private individuals, not through social housing. And within the Northwest, we have some of the poorest housing stock in terms of thermal efficiency, and we have the highest level of fuel poverty across the UK. There are some real challenges, but what it shows us as opportunities is investing in technologies such as insulation is a no regrets option. It reduces everybody's bills, it gives us warm homes and health. It does not matter whether that home in 2030 will be heated by a hydrogen boiler or by an electric heat pump. We need to do something with the housing stock in the region quickly in order to get anywhere near the targets. If I drew the 2038 targets or 2030 targets on that chart, we wouldn't be able to see the dots because it would be on the zero line. So our key ask, I think, is to provide this clarity to promote action. Strategy is really important, and if we look at London as an example, London are clearly pursuing a very aggressive decarbonisation of transport through public infrastructure, through the tubes, through their electric bus and hydrogen buses in London. But they are setting out very clear and ambitious targets. Now, I think if you look at Manchester with its clean air zone recently, where it effectively deferred the date for the introduction of a clean air zone, That's going to be challenging for the region. Manchester makes up around half of all energy consumption within the northwest. Lancashire makes up the other half, and a small amount is consumed in Cumbria. But business, I think, has a huge role to play. So, for example, at Electricity Northwest, we recently revised our company car policy. And we introduced a number of things. We introduced salary sacrifice so people could access electric vehicles. We put electric vehicles onto our lease list. We introduced things like charging for electric bikes, up the cycling limit. We allowed people to do salary sacrifice to buy season tickets for public transport. That has had a huge change. 75% of our employees now, when they change their car, are adopting an EV. They save money and we save money. So part of our outreach, which we will support you with through various commissions, is to actually engage business and show how the huge incentives that are there can be adopted by business to both improve their financial efficiency, generate jobs and create real change. So it's conscious of time, I'll hand over to Helen at that point.
I'd just like to say thank you to my glamorous assistant, first of all. So good morning, everybody. I am Helen Boyle and I'm Head of Regional Development for Cadent. So what I'm going to do this morning, building on what Steve's told you about the need for action now and clarity of messaging around what business can do now in order to lead this, I'm going to look a bit further into the future on the role of low carbon hydrogen, but I'm also going to tell you what's happening now. So while we acknowledge hydrogen is an uncertainty, particularly around the role that it could play in domestic heat, there is a lot happening to remove that uncertainty. So in other words, the next 5 or so years around the development of hydrogen is absolutely key. So I wanted to give you a bit of clarity about what's happening, Cadent's role in that, and what we're doing to really remove some of the uncertainty. So just first of all, and Steve gave a really good figure of 23 million homes in the UK. So Cadent as a gas network operator is the largest gas network, and 11 million homes are currently connected across the country to our network. So our day job is keeping those homes warm and people within them warm and safe. But as a gas network currently carrying natural gas, fossil fuel, the main focus of our work now is looking to the future and managing the transition away from fossil fuels to greener energy vectors. And for us, that's hydrogen. So what we've seen in the last 18 months or so is huge support coming out from national government from in the forms of various different strategies. You won't be surprised to know there's not an enormous amount of detail there always, but the most important part of these strategies in many ways, and building on what Steve has said, is that it acts as a really clear indicator to private investment that this is a good thing to spend your money in. And what I would echo is we have lots of conversations with private investors who have a lot of money to spend. What they want to know and what they're waiting for is, where do we spend it? They're waiting to understand where the returns are, where the benefits are, what the value chain looks like. And then a lot of checks are going to get written in the next few years. And it's so important to understand it's not public money that's going to make this happen. It's private investment. So some examples of what's come out of government that have been really strong indicators of the support of hydrogen over the last 18 months ago is starting with Boris's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. The growth of a low carbon economy was number 2 on that list. And there are a number of really key dates, which I'll go on to in a bit more detail in a slide coming up. But closest to us at the moment is this 2023 date. And that's where government is looking to have all the evidence that it needs in order to make a decision around the role of blending hydrogen into the gas network. Essentially what that means is mixing hydrogen at up to 20% volume into the gas network as it is at the moment, because it doesn't have any impact on anyone's appliances, both industrial and commercial appliances, and also people's boilers, gas fires, gas cookers in people's homes. But what it does
is while it doesn't have any impact, it removes about 7 or 8% carbon emissions without anyone having to do anything, essentially. So that's why the government is asking for evidence around the role that blending hydrogen into the gas mains could play, really by the middle of this decade, when we see hydrogen production really starting to ramp up. And I'll give a bit more detail on the next slide around the programme of work called HyDeploy that Cadent is running, which is building that evidence base around blending hydrogen. The next thing we see on the 10-point plan is a hydrogen village trial. This has been something that is very close to me because I've been working on it for several months now, so I feel like I know it intimately. But all the gas networks were asked to submit a proposal to run a hydrogen village trial. So in other words, a whole village, around 2,000 properties running on 100% hydrogen, so not a blend, completely removing natural gas, by the middle of this decade, by 2025, running for about 2 years. And the importance of that is it puts the consumer at the heart of this transition. This isn't really about, does the engineering work? We think the engineering will work. It's more about the people involved in this. And if you go back to that, in the future, 23 million homes need to change. There's people sat in those homes that have to make decisions and will be disrupted and will have to choose between a heat pump or a hydrogen boiler. So the point of running this trial is trying to understand what that transition looks like when you do it at a village scale, and then in the future rolling that out to a town trial as well. So you start with a village and you move to a town. Some other important points on there is the 5 gigawatt hydrogen production target. Seems a bit low, but at the moment what we know is hydrogen is a certainty for use in industrial decarbonisation. So that's really hard to abate industry. So what government's saying is, well, we'll start with industry because we know there are no alternatives. If you have a high temperature industrial process, you need a fuel that has a flame. So hard to electrify. So in that case, hydrogen's a given, get on with it. So we will help to economically support 5 gigawatts of production to help that industrial decarbonisation. In the future, when we've got evidence around domestic heating, that will increase. And so there will be a new round of an economic structure to help to support increased and ramped up production of hydrogen. The hydrogen strategy came out at the back end of last year. Now that talks about, this is all aimed at that private investment, because that talks about hydrogen making up to 35% of the future energy mix and wanting to target around £4 billion worth of private investment to help to get the hydrogen economy going. So there's some big figures and lots of money being talked about here, but a couple of things that were really important on the back of the hydrogen strategy that came out on the result of that were consultations into the low carbon hydrogen standard. In other words, how low carbon is low carbon? And this refers to both green and blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen being produced from natural gas with the CO2 captured and stored, which is what we're seeing being developed as the industrial clusters. It's the only way that you're going to get large volumes of hydrogen going by the middle of this decade that's commercially viable, but also green hydrogen, distributed generation of hydrogen produced by renewable electricity. So what are the standards? And they're only going to be supported from an economic models perspective if it is a project that is producing what the base terms as low carbon hydrogen. So nothing's going to get financial support unless it is deemed as low carbon. And I think that's important because there is a lot of misinformation out there around the carbon intensity of hydrogen and the projects that are being planned in this country. The other really important consultation was around the economics and models to support the growth of hydrogen. And where that's landing at the moment is a contracts for difference type structure. And if you think about where we were with electricity a number of years ago, lots of generation from coal, and then the growth of renewables. The growth of renewables was supported by a similar economic structure, contracts for difference. And now we're seeing enormous advancements in that and actually moving away from that CFD type structure because actually they wash their face on their own. So gas will go through a similar transition with hydrogen. It will green and it will decarbonise exactly like electricity has done and will carry on doing. What we've got to do is support it. And I'm really pleased because Steve and I do talk a lot together at places like this, because it's really important that people see this isn't gas versus electricity. This is gas and electricity working together, planning the infrastructure, understanding the needs of the region, working collaboratively in order to not be a barrier to net zero, because as soon as you start arguing over one technology over another, you create inertia. And it's the last thing we want to do as infrastructure providers. You have inertia, you don't have private investment. And then importantly, the heat and building strategy, which talks about a heat policy decision in 2026. Now, why that's important is because that is going to look at the role of hydrogen in domestic heat. So if we think about, as I've mentioned before, hydrogen is accepted as playing an important part in the decarbonisation of industry and of transport, heavy transport. We're not talking about passenger cars, they should be EVs. We're talking about heavy goods vehicles. We're talking about, I have lots of conversations with local councils around bin trucks and those kind of things that are so inefficient as vehicles, and they'd love to be able to move them to hydrogen, but at the moment the cost of the vehicle themselves is actually extremely expensive. That will need to change as soon as there is a realise that there is a market for these vehicles and a structure. The market will change and the costs will come down. But the heat policy decision, that where we still have uncertainty around the role of heat, is in domestic heating. So that 2026 date is really crucial to help to remove the uncertainty for everyone sat in their homes thinking, what happens to my heating system at the moment? In the future, what changes do I need to make? How much will it cost me? Who will do it? And when will it happen? So that's what we've seen really coming out of the government in the last 18 months or so, and they're really strong. Oh, I've got a little pop-up box, so I'll get rid of that. No, it keeps popping. Press defer. Sorry, it's not giving me it's giving me a closed programs. Right, let's give that a go. Hopefully that stays down. IT always bites me on the bum. What this chart does is try to explain the things that I've just talked about on a timeline. The top line is talking about the High Deploy programme and the different phases of the High Deploy programme, which is providing the evidence base for blending hydrogen by that 2023 date that was on the 10-point plan. The next level down is what's happening around, well, okay, that's great. That removes 7 or 8% carbon emissions, but what are we going to do about the rest? So this is looking at what are the projects that are doing to help to remove the uncertainty about the role of 100% hydrogen. And that's where you see that's the hydrogen village, which will lead to a hydrogen town. And by the way, this will happen in the northwest. So I'm about to find out on Monday, but very strong indications are that the hydrogen village will be in the northwest. And underpinning all of that at the moment in this region is HyNet. So the industrial cluster that was the track 1 status, along with the cluster on the northeast, will be producing low carbon hydrogen. And when we say low carbon, we mean about 90% carbon free. I'm going to carry on anyway. I know this stuff, it's fine. We'll be producing hydrogen by the end of 2025, beginning of 2026, initially to decarbonise industry, but then as the role of heat becomes less uncertain, production can ramp up. And what you will see is it will start to move further north into the northwest and into North Wales. So while this seems like a project that sits a long way from you in terms of Lancashire, it's not for future years. But what it also is, the reason it's so important is that it tracks the money and investment. And what we say within Cadent is if anywhere regionally is going to get hydrogen, it's the northwest, because so much of the national strategy delivery is focused in this region. So I want us all to see it as a big opportunity, really, for something for the future. So I'm going to stop now because the IT is completely conked out, Gabe, which is probably my fault.
That's one reason I reluctantly printed something, just in case I jinx IT. No, thanks both Steve and Helen. Really powerful messages, but also challenges in there. So there's something there around private private investment, and actually how do we bring that into Lancashire? So where's the landing strip for private investment to Lancashire? That said, it's also important to recognise that things are happening. This isn't all future stuff. I was really pleased when Steve Fraser invited me. I grew up in Malton le Dale, and Baxy's was always a fixture. I thought it had gone, if I'm honest, because it's now got houses where it used to be. However, in a back street of Bamber Bridge, there are 600 people working on boilers, and importantly, they now have a hydrogen boiler, which is fit for market. So these things are already creating an economic wealth within the county. I think we've got fertile ground given the technological background, and we'll hear from Miranda later on when she comes over from the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, which is being opened as we speak by a minister. So we'll hear more about that, those sort of economic opportunities later. We will take a break at 11:15, but if anyone wants to make themselves really popular now by asking any questions, perhaps if you have a specific question that's really burning for any of the speakers we've had so far, we can take that. Alternatively, if you want to surround people while we're out getting a drink. But are there any sort of key sort of strategic questions, Judith?
I'm very heartened to hear what's happening with gas and electric. But in Lancashire, we have a very rural with a lot of villages, particularly where I come from, Miserable Valley, and the homes there are not connected to the gas grid. Now, as far as I understand it, apparently, shipping are the only project with gas alternative to oil, and ultimately, rural villages are not going to be able to afford the capital infrastructure to install or investigate low carbon off gas. Will Lancashire County Council be working with others to develop a strategy on developing low carbon strategy for rural Lancashire?
Okay, thanks, Judith. I don't know if you caught that at the back. So broadly, the question is around gas connection for rural communities. A direct question to the County Council, but also I guess Helen may also have a view in terms of that infrastructure development. So Sean, Helen, I don't know whether you've got a perspective on that.
Yeah, so you're right about chipping. That's the one place at the moment that I mean, there is other stuff going on in Hyndburn, for example, there's a solar farm planned. I think the key here is the local electricity bill, which seems to have a lot of support at the moment, and that is key to. I think the aim is, the objective is for 10% of the UK's future energy being generated locally. So that will be really important coming forward, and I think that'll open the floodgates to a lot more. But yeah, we are working with local communities on scoping out potential opportunities, whether that be around, I mean, there's existing stuff already in Lancaster, so the hydro, as Gina knows all too well about. But there's all these other things that we certainly see it as a really vital opportunity, and so there's even talk now. We've had a moratorium on wind turbines since 2015. That's now coming back into conversations again because of obviously the situation. So,
okay,
yeah.
Thanks, Sean. So in the mix, Helen, any brief comments, and then we will break for it.
Well, it's probably to say, so you're off gas grid, but you're on the electricity grid, and I think Steve mentioned it before that the likely solution route for most of the properties that are off gas grid for future heating will be electrification. In the near term, what we would say is the importance of insulation and energy efficiency until we get to that point. And what it does is help to make any future solution as well cheaper and more effective. So I think that's probably the most likely solution in the future. Steve, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that as well.
Yes, so I think in the northwest, something like 96% of all homes are connected to the gas network. I think that's the stat, but there are 4% that aren't. And one of the things on net zero is taking everybody with us. Nobody's left behind in that transition. So the economic solution for people at the moment in rural communities is it's much cheaper to operate a heat pump than it is to lay a gas grid out to very remote communities, and the heat pumps are very efficient and can be made to work with suitable insulation. There is a question around who pays for what. So I think in terms of the heat pump itself, there are various grants available, and this is an area that the government are, looking to do more in terms of grant funding. In terms of the electricity infrastructure for fitting heat pumps, if any customer in the northwest of England fits a heat pump or an EV, any network upgrades are 100% paid for by Electricity Northwest. So if we have to treble the size of the grid for a particular community, that community don't pay anything for that. So that is funded through our sort of shareholder model. So they can adopt heat pumps, and this is I think this partnership where we have to, in order to meet decarbonisation targets, there's an element of picking low-hanging fruit, but you almost have to pick all the fruit simultaneously. So rural communities are probably more suited at the moment for heat pumps. Dense urban conurbations, you will see some people adopt heat pumps. Building upgrades are good for everybody, but you will see hydrogen start to penetrate the network and assist the larger urban communities in that decarbonisation. So for any golfers, we have to have all the clubs in the bag. This is not a one size fits all for any particular home or residential area. We do need all those technologies available.
Okay. Thanks both. What I'm going to suggest is, I'm conscious there will be other questions. I'm hoping all the speakers are going to stay around both for break and through to lunch. So if you could want to pin them against the wall somewhere and ask them a question, and we will try and have another question and answer session at the end. We knew this was ambitious. I'm just going to nudge the agenda by 5 minutes. So if I can ask, we'll take a break now, form an orderly queue at the drinks machines, which are free to vend today, apparently, bargain, and be back in the room promptly for 22, so 11:40, please. But thank you to the speakers so far this morning. Thank you.